Hi, everyone, and welcome back to Open Your Eyes to the Universe. I'm Gabrielle Martin, your host for this evening. And tonight on Youniverse, we're in conversation with a long-time meditator, Denise Lawrence, and our topic is masks and masquerades. Denise is an authentic being who gently nudges people towards realness as she decodes social norms. And as such, she's well placed to talk with us about masks and masquerades. She joins us from France, where she is based. Denise, it's such a pleasure to have you with us tonight, and thanks for agreeing to be part of our program. And it's a very warm yet wintry welcome to Down Under.
Hello, Gabrielle and the team there in Australia, and greetings from France to all of you. France is a warm summer, and interestingly enough, in the village where I live, they're making enormous preparations for tomorrow's huge festival where many people will be wearing their masks. And so it's a very appropriate moment to talk about this. What I thought I would do is maybe divide my talk into masks, first of all, and masquerades in the second part. And what I wanted to do is take a look at what I call the ego mask. And I've been working on this idea, this subject, this concept for quite some time. So I have a few thoughts that I would like to share with everyone. So in spirituality, there are aims of our spiritual practice, and one of the aims is to become free from the ego mask. So I thought it'd be interesting to talk about what the ego mask is, and also different ways in which we can effectively go through the process of dropping the mask until finally we can be totally the authentic self. And so the authentic self is totally true to the self, who is not unwilling or afraid of revealing the self, who has worked through things like shame and any of the emotions that one can experience triggered by any kind of something or another which would take you away from what we call your seat of self-respect, your position. And Gabrielle was talking to us about how people would use masks to hide their maybe inappropriate behaviors so that they wouldn't have to be castigated or approached or anything like this in Venice. But here the ego mask is very much to do with public opinion and how we want to look good. So there is another thing called looking good syndrome. And very often a person will put on a mask to look good and to hide their weaknesses. Ego, I will define it as this mask which one puts up as soon as there is this feeling that I might be seen, and I don't want to be seen because I feel that I'm not okay. It's not so much that I don't want to be judged as not okay, but I don't want anybody to see my vulnerability, my intense emotions that may easily be provoked as a consequence of some or another kind of trauma. So I'm equating the mask, the ego mask, and trauma. It's interesting to make a reference to what Gabrielle was saying concerning the use of mask in religious rituals. And many religious rituals exist in order to fend off negativity, to become free from the terrible consequences of some kind of trauma, which made a person turn to the religious practices or the religious experience in the first place. Because my research has shown me that the very existence of religion is a response to some kind of catastrophic human experience. In comparison with that, you have a period of history where people did not have religious rituals. These are very, very ancient times. Normally speaking, when people go back to ancient times, they go back to the primitive religions. If you can imagine that there could have been a time before primitive religions, when the world was in perfect harmony. And there are a few indications to suggest that there could have been such a time. For example, a lot of the religions believe in heaven. If you see any pictures of heaven, it seems quite earthly, even though people do say that heaven is up in the sky and there are angels and there's God and there's a whole different world, but up in the sky, which is nothing like the world we know here, the planet Earth. What I think provokes ego and provokes the mask is trauma. And as far as I can tell, pretty much no one on the earth is completely free from having some kind of traumatic experience. And trauma, not only in the sense of physical injury, but trauma to the soul, trauma to the very being, which occurs in dysfunctional family environments, which there are many, many. It could be because of war, it could be because of many reasons that make you as part of a minority, which may be penalized just for being a minority by the majority in any particular population. Childhood trauma is very, very frequent because a child is vulnerable, innocent, doesn't know what people do, assumes everyone and everything is good. A child is called egocentric. That means the child is in the middle of their universe and everything else revolves around that child. As the child grows up, then you are no longer the center of the universe. You move to the side and you become one of many. But there are many things that happen in early childhood which mark a child, which wound a child, and that wound remains for the rest of their life. And they will form their character using this ego mask to present themselves as the way they think everyone assumes and demands that you should be. These ego masks also translate as character defects. One of the things that is very interesting about the ego mask is that the person who's wearing it doesn't see it. Other people see it. I think the person who really, really, really doesn't want to be seen will construct a mask which looks so plausible and so attractive and so good that people really think it's real. And then you become fused with that mask. So you create an identity, you become that identity, and that will eclipse your essential identity. And then in that case, which is very often the case, a person really doesn't know who they are. This happens very especially when the trauma that a person has experienced, especially childhood trauma, in the context of their family or their school or their religious, the religious authorities of their church or temple or synagogue or whatever. These things are, you can say, traumas that are perpetrated by the authority figures who classify themselves as we know what is right, and whatever we are doing is right and proper and good. And if you don't like it or find it hard or find it upsetting, that means there's something wrong with you, not something wrong with what we're doing. And what this does is causes a distortion in the soul itself. And then the person is no longer able to trust the voice of conscience. I do give a lot of importance to the voice of conscience because I consider the voice of conscience to be an inner voice that is the most reliable of all guides, and that lets you know whether what's going on is right or wrong, whether what people are telling you is correct or incorrect. When those people force their authority on a child, this causes the child to have to shut down the conscience. So this is a form of child abuse, which is not really recognized, not really classified as such. And especially in earlier times, parenting practices, educational practices, religious authorities' ways of communicating to young children it contains a lot of violence and abuse and diminishment of the child in question. And if the child happens to belong to a minority group or an indigenous group or something like this, then there is a much greater amount of trauma that is given or imposed or perpetrated. And then the person grows up and tries to live a normal life. And the only way they can do that is by this mask. And what the mask does is it isolates the person from the rest of the people because you're always pretending. This is ideal if you have a career as an actor where you always have to be somebody else. And so people with these kinds of masks can be very, very effective as actors, as criminals, as imposters. Someone who is a con man or woman, there is a very close connection between the ego mask that is adopted and character defects. So a character defect is the way in which the person who was traumatized will adopt a mask and then will actually do to others what was done to them in the first place to traumatize them. So the person with the ego mask also has a tendency to be very damaging and harmful to other people in terms of being very insensitive, in terms of cruelty, emotional abuse, possibly even physical abuse, definitely verbal abuse, but it'll be very sophisticated. And the victim of it will be not really easily able to respond because the ego mask perpetrator will be very clever at disempowering the victim emotionally, socially, etc. It is something very important to work with. And when a person decides, okay, I think that there's something wrong with me, and I want to be real, I want to be authentic, I want to develop myself spiritually, and as soon as they start to look at themselves from a spiritual angle, which means from the inside, They start to meditate. All of their trauma will surface from their subconscious to the conscious mind, and they will start to re-experience all these things, and they will try, like anything, to push it back down. But in fact, the purpose of spiritual practice is to enable and encourage these deep wounds to come to the surface, because these deep wounds are driving this false personality, this mask, and making the person more and more distant from themselves, which means they cannot have intimate relationships. They've got to always be performing. They cannot let anybody be too close in case they might see that this is all a performance. So they keep people distant. They are basically very lonely people. And so there is a vast difference between what's going on the inside and the performance that is going on externally through the mask. And so therefore, it is a circumstance that is very disempowering, because it drains the person of their spiritual energy. A lot of energy is required to keep up the image, the performance, the thing which is not real, because behind it, the real one is suffering. And the self, who has gone into ego mode as opposed to real self mode, is operating all the time against their own self. All of this requires a very great and deep healing. We need to think about how we heal. One of the ways that helps a person to become free is, of course, meditation. So what I'd like to do now is for us to just take a moment to go into meditation, and I will just describe a little bit what that's like, and some stream of words I would use to carry myself closer and closer to the real me, and really see what of me is fake and pull away from that. So take a moment to become quiet and turn your attention within. You are thinking of yourself as just a being, not a personality, not your designation, your performance. You're just a being. And a being is light, like a star, this pure point of energy. Everything that is me is merged in that point. So in meditation, you withdraw from the externals, turn within, and just be. Be still, be light, be quiet, at peace. You know that your real self is hidden away in the depths of your spirit. So go there and say to the real self, I am with you. I know you're there. I have made up a false self to operate with, and so I have neglected you, my real self. But now I need to work together with you and stop working against you. So I'm coming to you in peace. There has always been internal conflict between you, my real self, and my ego, false self. And I want to resolve this conflict. I want to come together with my real self so that my false ego self can just fall away and disappear. Because it is important for me to be true to my real self. So this is my intention. This is my work to be real and to figure out all the things that caused me to create my false ego, my mask. It looks nice, but it's not real. And real is much better than something that appears to be beautiful, nice, pleasant, powerful, etc. It's all fake. And I don't want to be fake. Feel the stillness of that intention to be real. And then gently bring yourself back to your everyday self. And let us go further. Thank you. So beyond mask comes masquerade. Masquerade is not just the mask that you're wearing yourself. Masquerade is the whole performance that you operate with, which is an amplification of your mask and which may be very toxic. You may be motivated by doing something which is a kind of revenge. Why would we feel the need to take revenge? Is because whatever it is or whoever it is that perpetrated or caused your initial trauma or subsequent associated traumas, because you suffered, there is a certain amount of hatred, and you will blame that you did this to me. And if you haven't been able to do that, you will have a slightly different feeling, which is still in the line of revenge, but instead of being directed outwardly, it's directed inwardly. Instead of directing your anger, revenge against the identified perpetrator, you will direct it against yourself, because the people who may have done these things to you are the ones you are supposed to love, honor, and respect. Parents, family members, school teachers, authorities, religious authorities, all of these are people you have been taught to love, honor, and respect. The mind of a young person cannot do things which are mutually exclusive. And so if there's some damage that's done, somebody did it to somebody. So if you can't focus your displeasure against whoever caused you trauma, you will focus it against yourself, saying, I am not worthy, I deserve this, I am a bad person, those people are right, I have no value. And in this way, you internally have an inner self-talk, which is very antagonistic to yourself. And then you have to compensate for it. So this compensation is the masquerade. The compensation also includes that your masquerade makes you look like you are very perfect and pure and sweet and diplomatic and politically correct, and you have the perfect mask. And then your masquerade is how you are going to carry out your revenge against the people who are perceived by you to have been responsible for your suffering and damage and pain, and you want to take revenge. And so therefore you will do all sorts of things which look like very nice, very sweet, very good, very generous, very pure, the perfect family relationship, the perfect educational relationship, the perfect religious or spiritual relationship, but it'll hide a nasty knife, a dagger, some poison, some instrument that you want to use to actually damage. But you do it so sweetly and so nicely that nobody could possibly imagine that that's what you're doing. Or if ever it gets discovered, nobody could imagine that you are responsible for it. You're the most unlikely to be the suspect. This is the masquerade. And so here we are, a person who circumstantially got into a situation which got amplified and amplified by the mask production, then the masquerade production, and then eventually it all, as all false things do, it all starts collapsing around you. And then you have to do things to hold it together, to shore it up, to convince people it's real, to convince yourself that it's real, but yet it's falling apart. And so this is a very, very critical moment for the person who has been operating using the masks of ego to cover up not necessarily something bad that you did, although there may have been a lot of bad things subsequently, but initially something bad happened to you. And then there is a saying that you tend to do to others what was done to you. It's quite a significant saying, because this is what happens. And in order to do to others something that doesn't correspond with your values and your essential self, but corresponds to something that's really the opposite of it, you have to be practically schizophrenic, which is a very great strain on your mental and emotional health. And so in some cases where this is quite an extreme situation, you may really create something which is known in psychology as compartmentalization. You will compartmentalize, and you will have one side of you that's really lovely and beautiful and so on, and another side of you that's really awful. And you will make sure that the people that you perform the beautiful, lovely part with never get to meet the other people that you perform a really bad performance with. And this kind of split persona has been represented in novels and movies and so on, because it is something that happens, but not everybody understands why it happens, why it's getting more frequent, and if the self is caught in it or not, you cannot always detect. I think at the time when it starts falling apart and your ability to hide your pain and your distress becomes more difficult, and it will bleed through, and there'll be kind of cracks in the mask where the real face is becomes visible through the cracks. But then we have to also see that there are three layers, you can say. So the one layer is your fake mask and all your masquerading that you do, the whole scenario that you operate with. And then the cracks in the mask show your trauma, your wound, which is also not the real you. What you want to get to is the real you, which is behind the trauma. It pre-exists to the trauma, though the trauma may be ancient. And this is what spirituality focuses on, this essential self, the original self, the one who corresponds to your ideal that you're trying to create in your mask. But you can't create that ideal without resolving the trauma. And so part of spiritual work is to open up the trauma, resolve it, and let go. It's a big piece of work. Having discovered, you gradually become one with your essential, original, pure spirit that you are eternally, but which was damaged by life. So one has to move away from the distress, the anger, the revenge, the fake, let the false ego fall down. And this is not easy, because it is like dying. And this is why there is the expression ego death. And of course, everybody is afraid of dying. They don't like dying. We would like to be immortal. Of course, spirituality says, well, you are immortal, so all you have to do is consider yourself to be immortal and return to that. But you can't return without going through all of the things that produce this mortality, this trauma, this mask. And so it's a journey. And we go on this journey step by step, gradually returning to who we always ever were in the first place, the beautiful, undamaged, perfect, pristine being of light who manifests authentically through the material body in the world, and then relationships are real and true, and you are at one with yourself. So this is the journey. And so let me finish there, and let us return our attention to Gabrielle. Thank you very much.
There's something I'd like to ask you, and we've got a few questions here as well, but having worked in social development for quite a long time, and including the justice sector, there's an expression that says boys go bad and girls go mad. I'm just wondering if you consider that our responses to trauma are gendered, where women tend to internalize, I'm not good enough, and men tend to externalize in ways of violence. Is that something that you've noted within a spiritual context?
This is because of what I call the patriarchal system. And the patriarchal system begins with ideas. And ideas are initiated in the religious context. And then they go into the social context and the legal context. I think spirituality says the first mistake, the first incorrect piece of information that is told within any society, any community in the whole world, there are very few exceptions to this. And they say basically that people are either boys or girls. And so that means there's two kinds of humans. So the moral authorities noted that there is conflict between men and women and between the different groups, conflict over territory, water, food, all these things. They thought that a good way to resolve it is to say that the best thing is to give all the rights to people who are in a dominant position. That way they'll feel good about themselves and they'll be nice to the people who are independent or subservient situations. And this might have worked for a little while, but at the present time, it has created this polarization. And I think it's took place over time, slowly. And what we have now is a big polarization between men and women, the North and South, the East and the West, between different religious groups, different social groups, between man and nature. There's just tremendous polarization, which produces conflict. And so if you're looking at it relatively superficially, you may come up and say, boys go bad and girls go mad. But what provoked that is these ideas, which are created by the patriarchy, the males who are the elders responsible for the society. And so they created a narrative which was favorable to men in positions of power and stacked against people who are not males and not in position of power. And this imbalance has been amplified slowly over time. So it's not really enough to say boys go bad. Why do boys go bad? And which boys go bad? Because not all boys go bad. And which girls go mad? Because not all girls go mad. But when you are in a dysfunctional family situation, and dysfunctional family means where there is violence, and violence means where people who think that because they are the males and they are the dominant one, therefore they can do whatever they want to anyone who is less muscular than them. That this causes terrible trauma, and there's a lot of sexual abuse of females at a very young age because it keeps them down. And it does indeed cause serious mental health problems. The religious, social, and legal system is biased in favor of the dominant males and against the females. For example, if a female will be sexually abused or molested, a young girl, and she says anything, then that she is told, and everybody else is told, the nature of girls is they lie. So if a girl says anything like this, it means it's a lie, which means we can punish her for it. And you punish her to such an extent that she is made unable to speak. But she's holding all this trauma inside, which will cause her to have a psychotic break. and it happens regularly, frequently. And if she goes to the police will say, oh, you made it up. Where's the evidence, And where's the witness? If you don't have evidence and a witness, it means you're lying. Sometimes even they will abuse her additionally. You have lots of evidence of that. And so this is why you have this nice statement, boys go bad and girls go mad, but you do not have any idea what's behind it. And so it's very important to educate people in these things to realize that whatever the conventional moral authorities think is just great is actually highly toxic. And we need to address it, because otherwise the society will fall apart irreversibly.
What was that gaping wound? Or can we consider that there's a gaping wound in those who created a patriarchy?
Oh no, there's no gaping wound in the people who created the patriarchy. People who created the patriarchy decided that males are strong, and they're the ones who are the boss. They have physical strength, and physical strength means better. So they are initially in a position of protecting those who are females or those who are weaker than themselves. When there is, and it happens in many situations, if there is no higher authority and the person says, okay, I'm the higher authority, then they will amass power. And as you might be aware, there is something called power corrupts, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. And so there's this corruption that happened. When you look at spirituality, you're looking at the soul as opposed to the body. So strength in the soul is different from strength in the body. And if you are operating in a difficult terrain as a male, you have to have muscles, you have to protect maybe against wild animals, so you have to fight, you have to protect your territory against somebody else who might want to take it. And so you have to be a warrior, you create weapons, you give all the instructions, everybody has to do what you say, etc., etc. And then you may cause damage to people, then you die. Now, after death, a lot of people don't know what happens, but according to spirituality, you reincarnate, and you reincarnate in the opposite gender. So there you are, you're this person who has done all sorts of things to show your strength, especially to those who are weak, and then you reincarnate in the format of a person who is weak. And then whatever you did to somebody in the previous time, some other person in the format of the body that is strong is going to do that to you. And there's where you get your gaping wound. And there is where you again reincarnate, again as a male. Again, you're in this environment where males and females are defined as the males are dominant and the females have to be in service of the males. And so you can do as you wish. If you have very good qualities and you see the female not as an object, but as a being, then you are a little bit out of the box. You're not what everybody else is like. And so you go along with that. And this is gaping wound keeps shifting from one gender to another, to another, to another, and it grows. And then you get wars. Whenever there are wars, there is a horrific behavior, because the people on the other side are the enemy, and the enemies, you always dehumanize them, so they're not people, they're worms or snakes or something like that. which gives you the right to chop them up in little pieces, rape them, torment them, torture them, boil them in boiling oil or whatnot, which really happens. Then you die, then you reincarnate, and you have got this debt, you see. Now, this is why there is this escalation. And the narrative continues with the idea that if you were physically stronger, socially stronger, financially advantaged, and so on, therefore you deserve it, and therefore you can behave as you want. And so it goes. Therefore, I think that spirituality is most useful to redress the balance, but it takes a long time to understand it, to create the necessary changes, and to heal all the wounds that have accumulated over millennia, you know.
That's going to take quite a global move to shift that around. Can you make some comment on that, Denise?
Well, if you see the state of the world at the moment, it's very scary, because we've got a scary war going on in the Middle East, which is escalating, spreading. We have a scary war going on in between Northeast Europe and Russia, which is bringing in United States and other global powers. It's looking difficult to resolve, and people are getting very angry with each other, and there's misbehavior, there's diplomatic faux pas going on. And then on top of that, you have the global warming, which is, at the moment, you've got 5 active volcanoes in Europe. You've got huge storms, huge fires, bigger than people have ever seen. These last few days of July have been the hottest on record ever at any time. So things are getting intense. And that means everybody globally is under pressure. When you're under really big pressure, it's very difficult to behave according to your nice, beautiful mask, because it just cracks open and your more primitive side comes out and starts behaving all over the place and panicking and getting angry, and, you know, all sorts of crazy stuff happens. To bring everything to calm and peace is the most important thing. So people who think about spirituality and try and meditate and all of this, they're doing whatever they can to manage themselves, you know, but then you need to do more than that. You need to be able to spread that vibrationally and also educationally. But I don't think people will listen to these things when they're disturbed and distressed. But I do think that if you can put out a really powerful vibration, that person or those people can actually receive it and get calmed by it. So the vibration work, I think, very invisible, very subtle, no doubt, but it's very important to do that.
Here's a question. There's an expression, fake it until you make it. Is this self-deception and a mask?
Well, this is something that comes from the Addiction Recovery 12-step program, and it's very practical. A person who is in addiction recovery is somebody who's got the most fragile ego, and they're working on becoming honest, becoming free from substance abuse or doing certain behaviors that are considered addictive behaviors. And you are, in a very real way, deconstructing yourself, and it is too fragile to manage. You don't have power. And so they say, fake it until you make it. That means form a mask which corresponds in a very realistic way to how you want to end up as when you've done your work. It's not like a super ego mask that I am the most fabulous person in the world. No, it's like a normal thing. Give yourself this, keep moving forwards until it becomes your reality. This is the meaning of fake it till you make it in that context.
Another question, Denise. I've interviewed quite a few people for various jobs, and I've noticed that males in particular often talk themselves up, masking their lack of qualifications and experience with an outer confidence that doesn't equate to their actual experience and qualifications. Is this an example of the mask that you talk of?
Well, it is very much so, and it's also an example of the narrative produced by the patriarchy, which says males are okay. Can't you see I'm a male, therefore I must be wonderful, marvelous, and fantastic. Whereas the female is used to the other side of the narrative, which says females don't deserve or don't need a job. They should be at home looking after the children anyway. And if they're looking for work, well, that means there's something wrong with them. And so the narrative will create a bias in her own mind. She will internalize it, that she kind of apologizes for her existence. And so you may experience this. And this is because of this what I call the patriarchal system. It's a system, which is a social system. And it has very, very ancient origins, so long ago that nobody remembers them. And they're just born into it. And they think it's always ever been like that. If you look into it carefully, you find that it did have a beginning and that there was something that predated it. That means, in a sense, it's not a natural situation, it's a man-made situation.
Another question here. Are masks sometimes necessary? In my professional life, I so often need to mask how I may be feeling internally because it would be unprofessional not to.
Well, there's that, but also there's something else which I think is very, very valid, and that doesn't involve having to mask a weakness. What we are taught in spirituality is, right, you're actors. So you're actors, you go into a situation, you have to perform according to the needs of the situation, which means you're adopting a mask, because in a sense, a mask is an approach, an attitude where you have to perform in a certain situation. So your professional designation is something that requires a mask to go with it, and you have to dress accordingly as well. And so you create this persona, which is the meaning of this profession. And regardless of how you feel, you need to keep this face up, because that's your job. That's what you're paid for. And in that case, you will become good at it. And I think what's also really good in terms of important, useful, necessary masks is that you can put them on and take them off at will, because they're nothing like you hiding from yourself. You're performing as is required. As a good actor will be absolutely in the role that they're playing. So you have to play roles. So you have to perform accordingly. And as soon as that role is finished, then you go back to being your regular self when you come home, and you put a different mask when you go out socially. If you go to court, some different mask. You go to some, political thing, a different mask. You go to a holiday, different mask, and so it's very normal for us to put on and take off masks, but these masks, you never lose who you are. Those masks, the toxic ones, they are instead of who you are, and you lose yourself, or you become fused with the mask. That's where the problem is.
A mask for a role, if you like, as opposed to the ego mask.
Very much so, yeah.
Is there such a thing as spiritual masking? And is it connected to spiritual bypassing? Spiritual bypassing, as I understand it, is when you see a situation that requires some comment, some action, to do something, and you bypass. You don't address it. You keep it unspoken. You collude with the silence. You conceal it in some way. or you are part of a concealment in some ways?
Well, if I respond to it in terms of your description of spiritual bypassing, obviously there is a mask involved in it, but I wouldn't call it spiritual mask. I would call it just like any other toxic mask. But yeah, when you are not addressing something that needs to be addressed and you are colluding, then yeah, that's not okay. And that is dishonesty, that is cowardice, that is, but I don't know whether we'll call it a mask. Maybe we'll call it a mask. It's definitely a positioning that you take, which is a big character defect. I would put it like that.
Just moving into the God terrain now, you actually have spoken about removing our masks and becoming our authentic self. How does God help us to remove our ego masks and bring us into our authentic sense of self?
I would say it's not really God that does it, but when you meditate and your meditation involves turning your attention on God as you understand him, her, it. If you have accurate information about God and you focus your attention knowing yourself accurately as a soul, then you create a contact between the soul and the Supreme Soul. And this causes energy to pass between the Supreme Soul and the soul. And this energy, which is a very pure and very powerful energy, causes the stuff that is subconscious to come to your conscious mind. And this disturbs you a lot because it is true what comes up, but it's been buried. When you see this stuff in your mind's eye, this is what your ego has been covering, even to your own self. Now, when you do this kind of meditation and it brings it up into your mind's eye, then it only covers it on the outside, doesn't cover anything on the inside. And then you have to face yourself. And this facing yourself is fairly big of a situation because you have to face the fact that you are, angry, arrogant, whatever the thing happens to be. That's upsetting. And it makes you realize that you're not quite as okay as you make yourself out to be, both to the outside world and to yourself. And this can trigger a kind of a remorse and a commitment to change and to deconstruct the ego. And this is what goes on in addiction recovery programs, which is actually a spiritual program and which also encourages the recovering addict to give time to meditation. And people who meditate in the way that I do, who are not classifying themselves or getting classified by other people as addicts, they nevertheless have most of the stuff that an addict is dealing with, and they create all the fakery that an addict will create. So it's pretty similar in many ways. And you really have to deal with the unrealness in yourself, which is making you fake, and these toxic masks and so on. And then you realize that you do not have the power to do anything about it, but that if you connect with God, then you get the power to be able to deal with it. And then you have to keep it up and then slowly, little bit at a time, deal with it. So this is how the power of God, when you can get hold of it and use it for what it's supposed to be used for, this will do the job. Yes.
And Denise, can you tell us about your relationship with the divine and how that's changed over time?
My relationship with the divine is there since childhood. When I started to study Raj Yoga, then it became very clearly articulated, and I was able to really know what's what and who's who and what's going on and study. And so my relationship with the divine involves slowly and progressively recognizing um, that the way the religions portray God is much of an anthropomorphization, which means you assume and you declare that God is just like a human and behaves like a human, thinks like a human, reacts like a human, and so that's how God is, but actually not. You begin to realize that you have a relationship with someone who is a non-human, higher than a human. So that means you're trying to discover, and that one has the capability of slowly letting you in so that you can gradually see now who this is and how this one thinks and perceives, and what is this one's feelings about you, which are pretty elevated and right on, and that how this one is wanting to be with you and inviting you to be with this one and to take full advantage. And so gradually you shift away from all of what you've been taught about God in your cultural and religious background to something which is actually what it is. And that takes time. In the process, it causes you to have to deal with all the damage that your soul has acquired through life, just by life, that causes damage as time goes by, one way or the other, or you get into trouble one way or the other. And so you learn by this relationship how to be really true to yourself and really be in your power and really see what you have been doing, what you have been thinking, which is not real, or which is not in your best interest, or which is some kind of toxic thing that you've taken in. So you gradually get rid of it. You gradually change as a result of that. And you realize more and more clearly that this one is reliable, permanently accessible and available to you. And all you have to do is be in closer and closer relationship. And then the rest of everything becomes as it should, because you have the right perspective and you have the right understanding how to function. And your dysfunctionality gets eroded progressively. And this is a long journey, but it's a fabulous journey of really getting to know the most interesting being in existence.
I'd like to pitch this question. What are we like before anything ever happens to us?
Yeah, that's such a beautiful expression, which I also use this. What is it like to be me before anything ever happened? You are real, you are open, you are absolutely yourself, whatever is your natural response, your joy, it's all right there on the surface. Nothing is hidden away, nothing is tied in knots. You are you. And you are aware that, oh my God, I am a really good person. And all these people have been trying to, mess me around one way or the other. But the way you see yourself has been the way other people projected their ideas about you onto you, and you got distorted by that, you see. And so as you get free from that, you become how you are when no projection, the real you emerges. And it's absolutely wonderful and beautiful. And I don't know how else to describe it, because it's also very personal. Each one is different.
I wondered if you could share with us a meditation that, that yes, unpacks the masquerade, but also opens us up to this power that you've talked about with the divine, and how that heals and strengthens and takes us back to who we were before anything ever happened.
So once again, take a moment to become quiet and turn within. Think of yourself as that pure, bright light. Just as you can see on the screen, this radiant light. This is a representation of the Supreme Being, a star of immense power, immense light. And you are like that too, a star, radiant, beautiful. We think of ourselves as our body, but in fact, the body is an instrument, a very wonderful, perfect instrument for us to interact with other beings in the world of matter. But in order for me to return to my original self, I need power, strength, light, because the light of my being has become dim. And due to that, I could only perceive material things. Now I must activate my powers of perception so that I can perceive myself, the eternal, immortal being of light, the soul. Child of the Supreme Being, the student of the Supreme Intelligence, the follower of the light who leads me to freedom. So think deep about yourself. Allow yourself to just open up. Let the light come in. Other thoughts may arise. Let them float away. Stay with the light. Be light. Let the light fill your being with light. Let that light chase away shadows and dark memories. Be easy and be free. And you become, as you always ever were, a pure, peaceful, powerful, loving being of light who is free. Thank you.
It was beautiful. Thank you, Denise, so much. And very much enjoyed your rich sharing. It's been wonderful having you on Youniverse here in Down Under.
Thank you so much. It's been my pleasure to be with you, and thanks for inviting me.